Welcome back to Fast Market here on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest for a cash tag segment, and that's going to be Andy Swan, co-founder of LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Friday.
All right, so a happy Friday to you. Talking Dick's Sporting Goods. The stock was, basically flat on the year, down a little bit in 2022, but we're hitting 52-week highs in today's session. Their November report was pretty good. What kind of data are you guys seeing out of LikeFolio to support this?
Yeah, really strong performer, especially considering market conditions overall. Dick's performing pretty well. The company guided, that same-store sales may slip a little bit, 1.5 to 3% down, and we're actually seeing that play out almost exactly in LikeFolio consumer demand data. We're seeing consumer demand for Dick's Sporting Goods down 3% year over year. So really very much in line with what the company expected. The cool thing about this, though, for Dick's is that this is significantly better than the drops that we're seeing in some competitors like Hibbett's and Foot Locker, which are seeing much more dramatic year-over-year declines. And so I think that expectations are for a slight decline. That's what we think Dick's is going to continue to come in at. The one thing that's giving us a little bit of concern when it comes to Dick's Sporting Goods is that consumers are expressing some frustration with the online shopping experience, the e-commerce shopping experience, not living up to expectations at Dick's. And on a positive note, I think that what's really giving this entire sector a nice buoyancy, especially as we go into a potential recession, is that there's a real resurgence in youth sports, especially spring and summer sports. We're seeing that that across the board, across all kinds of youth sports. I think what happened during the pandemic is, there's a lot of buildup and there's a lot of appreciation that built up for these activities for young people, and people aren't taking that for granted anymore, and they're willing to spend the money to make those experiences great and to make sure little Johnny gets out there in his equipment, and Dick's Sporting Goods is a prime recipient of that. So I think that the long-term view for Dick's is very strong because they're in a really nice tailwind situation with youth sports really pushing them forward as we head into the spring and summer of 2023. I expect that will continue and accelerate.
Yeah, Andy, I got caught in a Dick's Sporting Goods about 2 miles from my house over Christmas. The lines were insane around Christmas. So I think it did real well. On the Nike news, a nice surprise out of Nike when their earnings came out. I think it was on the 21st of December. This chart is really impressive, especially in a bumpy market like we've been, Andy. But if we hit a recession, if, like the bank CEOs have been saying, if the consumer is weakening, is it going to touch this stock? Because this has a pretty good environment already baked in, Andy. But you're right that, if it's the least bad in a bad sector, I don't know if that gives me a lot of confidence to buy it here, especially when it's breaking all-time highs.
Yeah, it's the least bad in a bad sector. Well, it's the least bad, I would say, actually, in a decent sector. Mm-hmm. And in a decent sector is pretty good considering all the sectors. So that's kind of where we're at right now. I think the one thing that we're seeing just quantitatively and qualitatively is that, whether or not, the wallet gets a little tight or people start to have to pinch some pennies because of inflation or, some recessionary pressures, they still spend money on their kids' activities and sports. And that's a big driver of what's driving the growth at Dick's Sporting Goods, and I think will continue. So I like when I see kind of recession-proof tailwinds as the primary driver of growth for a company, and that's the case with Dick's.
Yeah, and we mentioned that their last earnings report in November was pretty solid here, Andy, and you've got the seasonality chart up there where it typically dips in the winter months and then picks back up as spring baseball kind of hits and some of the other sports. But Andy, you guys talk about happiness quite a bit in a lot of your data, and that matters a lot, right?
Yep.
What people are saying about these brand names. Dick's Sporting Goods has lost a lot of competitors across the board, and e-commerce sales. Maybe they're waning a little bit, but when you look at foot traffic, Kevin mentioned his Dick's Sporting Goods by his house being full. Is the happiness level still there for a name like Dick's Sporting Goods?
Yeah, it's starting to slip, and that's one thing that gives me a little bit of pause about Dick's, especially with the stock so close to all-time highs. We are starting to see a consumer happiness slip. Now, whether that's just a dip or a trend that accelerates into what's really going to matter for this company is that consumer sentiment as we head into those spring and summer months that drive so much of this company's foot traffic, web traffic, and revenue. So it's wait and see, but for right now, there is reason for a little bit of concern that they're not doing a great job of making all of those new customers completely happy when they walk into the store or log in online.
Now, here's a real quick question for you here, Andy, before we wrap this up. When you look at, I've been seeing a lot of retailers, a lot of brand names being downgraded recently, although Lululemon did get an upgrade today. Are we seeing that where maybe that inflationary pressure and that exhaustion, wages were, on the low end today during the jobs number, where people just might kind of just push away from spending altogether and all, stocks get taken down in that area? Because I've seen a lot of downgrades, price target cuts in the apparel and the retail and the brand space lately.
Yeah, I see good diversification though. If you walk through a Dick's, there's a lot of different ways that people can spend money. You can buy, there may not be as many people buying golf clubs, but there may be more buying football pads or baseball bats or athletic wear or shoes for their own workouts. So I think Dick's has a nice, it is a niche in some regards, but in others, they have a nice diversification of potential revenue streams, and I think that they will continue to benefit from this massive resurgence in youth sports. I wouldn't bet against them. I do think that this is a stock we look for more on dips than at current prices.
Yeah, if you had an earnings score now, we've got earnings about a month and a half. What would it be?
Completely neutral. We think the stock is pretty much priced right at this point.
Right, at 52-week highs. Good assessment there. Appreciate it, Andy. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thanks.
All right, that's Andy Swan, co-founder of LikeFolio, breaking down more good data from LikeFolio.